So I hope by now we've established that there's a common denominator across all smart grid programs, and that's the need for an intelligent information network. On the following pages, we'll explore a methodology of getting started with your network communications strategy, validating that your network is supporting your business requirements, and that you're adequately addressing security and compliance.
I think it would be a good place for me to step in, Jeff, and see if we can answer a couple of questions. I liked your language about talking about the different stages. And I've heard my power engineer friends say that these things that you call conversing and optimizing, that, we've had the data, or many utilities have this data already, and yet it's been difficult for them to get to that stage of actually sharing and blending data from multiple sources to begin to accomplish some of the goals you just laid out. Why is that, Jeff? Is it that the technology wasn't here and people don't realize now that it's arrived, or is it an organizational issue, or?
I think it's primarily organizational and process driven. It's really a combination of all those, really, Jesse, in the fact that the silos are pretty much used to operating within the existing processes and data. And now with this pervasive devices that are being installed, we're really allowing multiple organizations to get access to that data. So it's not really a technology issue per se. It's more, I would say, an organizational one.
Okay, thanks. Now, so far, we've gotten this big picture view of the business requirements that are driving the adoption. And before we start drilling down into details, we're pausing just a moment to take questions. We have a question here that says, we read of many utility smart grids here and abroad, but we can't tell how complete they are. And so they would value your view on best practices. Maybe another way of saying that, Jeff, is how far along are most utilities, and are there some examples of utilities that are, and I think we're going to see one of them at least today, CenterPoint, that is down this road. Are there others that we can look at as examples?
Absolutely. We're working with about 150 utilities right now on various projects throughout the world. You can imagine that other parts of the world may be further along in some of their deployments because of the lack of regulatory barriers that we might have here in this country. The states that have moved the fastest appear to have the regulatory environment that's much more friendly towards them. So you can imagine California and Texas are much further ahead in the deployment of their smart grid, which is allowing them to start using that data and doing analytics on that data to look for ways to improve the grid. So there's other countries that are further ahead on the renewable side, for example, and looking at the interoperability with the grid and with renewable energy. China is further ahead in Europe on electric vehicle deployment. So you're going to see a faster adoption and interoperability between electric vehicles and smart grids. So there's definitely a lot to be learned from other utilities around the world and even around the country, as they're all in different phases of deployment.
And we've got time for one more quick question and quick answer, Jeff. This listener asked that you showed workforce included in your network, but how does the network architecture handle mobile traffic that's not at a fixed location and that has these highly variable application needs?
I'm not quite sure the question, but the fact that the communications network would be extended to mobile workers and allow them to have better visibility into operations or into what's happening with the grid also enables them to be more efficient in the work efforts that they undertake. So I think it's really, at least a high level, connecting the workforce to information that's happening within the company.
And technically that happens with just an extension of the current RF technology, or is there a separate layer for mobile workers?
I think that's something that it can be public or private. It really depends on how the network strategy, communication network strategy is being deployed. So it really, I hate to say this, but again, it's a depends kind of response.
Yep,
If you can consolidate your networks, then all the better.
So we're come to phase 2 of our presentation today, and we're going to talk about some of the specifics and best practices around building an effective communications network. And I do want to remind you that IBM has helped dozens of utility companies with those networks. So Jeff's remarks comes from gleaning what works and what doesn't across multiple projects. So Jeff, would you carry on?
Great, Jesse. Thank you. So on this slide, smart grid communication networks are really complex. And the reason is they link together pre-existing power, IT, and communication networks. So understanding the interconnected nature of your business is the first step in really identifying your unique requirements and prioritizing your investments. So developing a network communication strategy and roadmap is a very large undertaking, and there are some basic prerequisites before attempting such a task. The first is really communications network governance structure is something we highly recommend. And this ensures that the business capabilities and requirements are being captured and prioritized, and that there's a common vision and strategy for the communications network. We find that that's very often missing within this infrastructure initiative. The second is that a real assessment of your network skills and capabilities. So does the utility have the network skills? And if not, where are they going to acquire them? And then lastly is the motivation. Is there really a compelling reason to act? Is there a business case for action around upgrading and modernizing the network? Ultimately, utilities will need to answer two questions related to the network. On a tactical level is, how can I make what I have work for me today? And then on the strategic level, what changes do I have to make to the existing network to support the future direction of the business? So we believe there is an overall and potentially optimal network communication solution that will address many of the immediate needs, as well as provide a unifying foundation to enable advanced functionality that currently appears out of reach or maybe cost prohibitive. So as you can see on the chart, we recommend a structured framework or methodology when approaching a network modernization effort. There are really 4 phases to this, and I only show 3 on the chart because we're really talking about the deployment at this point. But the first phase is strategy and assessment. The second is architecture and design. And the third is integration and deployment. The fourth that I didn't show on the chart really is around monitoring and management of the network once it is deployed. But these phases, we believe, will lead to a more realistic understanding of the project scope, faster implementation of the solution, and ultimately more predictable and expected business value that you have planned for. So if we take the first one under strategy and assessment, it's, again, important to collaborate with the business to determine the business capabilities, functionality, priorities. Too often, the business has trouble articulating its requirements in terms that the network team can design to. So this phase is many times overlooked. The alternative is the network team sometimes develops a technology strategy in isolation of the business strategy. And that's why we suggest a network governance council of business and IT. Once you've established your network vision and strategy, it's really critical then that you perform a thorough inventory or assessment of your existing communication technologies. You should really document your detailed business requirements and assumptions, the information that you need to collect and share with regulatory and infrastructure partners that you're considering. As you move into the next phase of architecture and design, you should be able to capture requirements for blueprints and test plans, for functional implementation, security, and operational integrity within the grid. At IBM, we have a methodology that we refer to as OCCAM, and it is a optimal communication methodology that helps look at existing assets as well as future needs of the business and tries to provide an optimal perspective of a future state architecture, for example. So that would be a good place to address that. And the key to integration and deployment is really aligning project recommendations with business requirements. We found that a well-designed communication network project needs to be well managed and tested and deployed with an eye toward future growth. It should effectively reach throughout and beyond the grid to connect with enterprise operations and suppliers and even your customers. So think about potential outcomes of your utility. Think about traditional voice IP and video collaboration. How can you add robust communication across the power network? How can a communications network support security and compliance initiatives across the business, for example?